when the journalist becomes the story, and we see that a lot more than we saw that 5 to 7 years ago. Now, there are many reasons for that. We are told by our marketing people that journalists have to be stars. Uh, you cannot be faceless and anonymous anymore. That's why we are forced to do things like these. Um, the second is that what happens when you turn the camera to yourself is that rather than tell the story, you start telling about how you feel. And when we see, and which is in every newsroom, one of the first things we were taught is that the editorial page, the church and the state. News was where you told the story, and the editorial page was where you said how you feel about something. And there was a reason why the newspaper editorial did not have a name. It's still, in many papers, the newspaper editorial is still unsigned. Because it was not thought of as the view of one person, but the view of an institution. And I think that line has got increasingly blurred in the last 7 to 8 years, and we can talk about what are the factors. The second thing about selfie journalism, so first is selfie journalism is when the journalist makes himself or herself the center of the story. And the second thing is much more important or equally important as the story is the journalist wants to take a selfie with the main characters of the story. And that has also happened in the last, again, 7 to 8 years, where we see lots of pictures of journalists with the subjects of their stories. Now, is it good? Is it bad? I don't know. But what it has done is it has upended the fundamental compact that we had as storytellers, was to keep ourselves away from the story. And this is something that puts us in the middle of it.
I think in Nepal we have a lot of it, now that you've explained what it is. We're both editors of newspapers. He's with the Indian Express. I edit the Nepali Times newspaper in Kathmandu. And I think there are quite a few journalists who have gone on to become novelists, but very few actually are both journalist and novelist, and even fewer write good novels, right, even if they're doing it. I think the challenge, I guess, would be that at a time when fact becomes more dramatic than fiction, why bother with fiction? And so we're in this strange epoch where facts don't matter anymore, or don't seem to matter anymore, where opinion has replaced evidence, where emotion carries more weight than expertise. And in this age of alternative facts, how do we as editors and journalists navigate the parallel universe that we find ourselves in?
Well, I would like to contest a bit what you said. I think facts do matter. So I think that that fake news, alternative reality, the spread and the power of that is grotesquely exaggerated. I think facts do matter. When your son or your daughter is sick and when you have to go to a doctor, facts do matter. When we choose a place where we want to live, we choose a place where we want to work, where we want to send, facts do matter. Facts matter everywhere. I think what has happened is there are certain stories where what is a fact? It's been said that we all love objectivity, but none of us can agree on what the term objectivity means. And I think when facts are contested, and which is happening in so many cases, and I think that's another conversation, which is about essentially where you're coming from, your politics, in societies that are deeply divided. You want a contestation of what is called facts. Uh, we have just seen last night students in Delhi coming out on the streets. Uh, and if you look at the response of leaders to what the students have been doing, it is very strongly contested.
Yeah, they're refusing to look at the facts.
Absolutely, absolutely. And they have a different story. They have a different story about the same facts. So one is that. Now, what we have to do as editors is, I think, the first fake news that we have to bust is inside the newsroom, which is that there is one incontrovertible fact. In many of the stories that we do, we have to be aware of our own prejudices. When we report on a story, the kind of people we speak to, who do we choose to speak to? Where do we choose to go? How much time do we decide to spend on source A as compared to source B? These are very important issues. 15 years ago, it would not matter. I'm sure, we both have been editors, and we know that things were easier.
Well, I guess people say that you cannot contest facts. Facts are facts. It's when you're an editor and you select certain facts to highlight a certain point that the truth gets distorted. So I guess what we have to be careful, what you just said, would be in the selection of those facts.
Yeah.
Who do we go to interview?
Yeah.
Who do we select?
And also we have to be aware of our own biases. There is a certain way I vote. Is that the way I want the Indian Express to tell the world to the reader? Should the Indian Express story reflect the world in the way the editor votes? No. You will say no, I will say no, and no sane person will say yes, unless you are a partisan paper, which also there is a space for that. But in an independent newspaper, I think just to be aware of the blind spots that you have are very, very important.
Yeah, I agree that's really important, but you just mentioned what's happening in Delhi, across North India last night and today. Jamia is burning, the universities are in turmoil. There's been quite violent suppression of the protesters. Now, the other side is telling the story totally differently, that this is being infiltrated, that is being provoked by opposition groups and all that. Now, how much do you feel as an editor the pressure from this monolithic state now to control the messaging? Because they seem to have succeeded in most newspapers. But how do you deal with that within your own paper?
Well, I would love to tell you that, there are phones every half an hour. But, there have been phone calls and there are phone calls. It is how you react to phone calls. I am lucky to be in a newsroom where nobody wants to know what the front page will be. It's a very...
You mean the reporters don't want?
No, the people who own the paper.
Oh, okay.
So they have ensured, and that is the history of the Indian Express, that the newsroom is a sacred space where we take a call based on what we think needs to be said. But you're right, there's a lot more pressure today than what there was 5, 7, or 10 years ago. And there are many reasons for that. I think one of the reasons also is social media. Leaders now think they don't need you. Boris Johnson refuses to give an interview to BBC. There are leaders who do not want to be questioned on stage.
Mr. Modi doesn't have press conference.
Yeah. And it is not just him. A series of leaders in India have not held what we would call an open press conference. And they can do that and they can get away with that because they have this. And they have the phone, and each one of us has a phone. And this huge army of social media. Almost every politician now has a newsroom of his or her own. And they don't have to follow the rules that you and I have to follow, which is fairness and at least get the quotes right, get the facts right.
Yep. Indian Express has this very important legacy of the emergency years when you stood up and told, very boldly told truth to power.
Yeah.
Would you say that the current situation in India is as much of a crisis as the emergency, or getting there?
You know, again, history, that was 1975. India was very, very different from what it is now in 2019. And, I'm a student of emergency. I was not, I was in school at that time. But I think where we are at this point is a weakening of the institutions across the board that are meant to push back. And once again, why they are weak, what do they need to do, what is the journeys each one of them has gone, that's much, much more complex. But yes, you're right, there is a serious issue of institutions which are supposed to act as the check and balance. Are they playing their role as effectively as they should?
So with selfie journalism, you also get self-censorship.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
Is this pressure building up to a level of self-censorship that is really distorting what's happening, or not?
No, I think there is. I think there are large sections of TV
Yeah.
that there is no doubt that they have spectacularly abdicated the role of what a good news TV organization has to do. Now, why they have done that? What is there a political economy argument? Is there an ideological argument? The family that owns the TV channel, has it taken a call? I don't know. I have not covered that as a story, but you do find large sections of TV who start the day by covering the opposition aggressively. Which is a good thing to do. But then in a democracy, when your focus is the political opposition, it's a serious issue. Yeah.
Yeah, and is the part of the toolbox that they use, is it intimidation? You mentioned social media. So intimidation, trolling, the bot armies. How important are they in this pressure to self-censor?
Well, I'm a little less melodramatic on these issues because the view from the Indian Express newsroom is you can resist it, you can do your job well, but yes, you have to believe in it. You have to have an ownership structure. You have to have a publishing culture that believes in what the mandate of journalism is. To be frank, we have done many stories. We get calls saying why did you do this? But we do that. We had a very strong editorial a couple of days ago on the Citizenship Amendment Bill, and we said it is completely against the basic structure, and it should be struck down.
Is there a feeling that with the Citizenship Amendment Bill and the National Citizenship registration, that the government might have gone a bit too far? I mean, somehow Kashmir was sort of being assimilated. Media had come to terms with it, in at least the mainstream media. But with this one, they might have gone too far.
I think there is, because we were talking to senior people in the government, and before the CAB came, and not many had factored in this kind of a reaction. Now, how they deal with this, how they respond to it, will be very, very important.
Do you see a slight shift also in the level of criticism of government in other mainstream media as well, with
I
this
think
one.
uh, I think this has also come at a time when your economy story is also unraveling a bit. We had the chief economic advisor, the former chief economic advisor's paper coming out just last week about this as being the great slowdown,
Yeah.
uh, and and that's a serious issue, especially in a country where 700 or 800 million people are under the age of 35. Uh, how big is your economy? What's the size of the cake? What's the kind of opportunity? So these are very serious issues, and I think both coming together is a
Yeah, and it's
problem.
worrying for us here in Nepal as well because, you know, the prevailing winds are from the south. So what happens in India ultimately happens here. And this kind of a trend would be very worrying for us as well. Um, in your book that you have, that is shortlisted for the DSC prize, you were in Berlin when the Nirbhaya rape tragedy happened in Delhi, and you have spoken about how helpless you felt as editor of a national paper, not being in India at that very critical time when the protests were kind of building up. But since then, and especially in the past month, there have been some horrific, almost similar kind of tragedies happening. But you are in Delhi now. So how are you doing it maybe a little differently than then, when you were further away?
No, no, I will need to tell you that my not being in the newsroom made almost no impact at all. I
But it
think
made an impact on you.
on me personally, because I'm very lucky to have a team that did a wonderful job of telling the story in all its different layers. And um, and when you're saying at the beginning about fact and fiction, uh, so what I have felt as a journalist, as an editor, is that there are certain stories where facts do justice to it, where you can use what you call the toolbox of journalism uh, um, to tell that story. But there are certain stories where I felt that I cannot use that toolbox, and where I have to go to fiction. Um, and in this story, for example, it was more about what people were not talking about was where do the young boys come from? And when I was in Berlin, my son was 6 years old, and sort of he saw snow for the first time in his life. And while working on this book, I found that the youngest perpetrator, or convict, accused, whatever you call him, he left home at the age of 7. Uh, so he was a child, um, and I think fiction gave me the tool to speak what was considered the unspeakable, is to look at, because that's also a part of the India story. More and more women in India are coming to school, are staying back to study in college. More and more are entering the public sphere. More and more are working, but in a deeply divided country. Uh, um, they also meet young men or young boys who've who've had a very different journey.
But what would have prevented a journalist from getting closer to the juvenile rapist story? Is it because of laws protecting minors' privacies?
That is one.
Yeah?
We
Which
did.
is why your first sentence is,
Yeah, mine.
I can't say my name
Yeah.
in the book.
No, no, we did, and we did a story, and but but the kind of mail, the kind of phone calls I got uh, when we did that story, uh, um, and I can understand.
What, angry phone calls?
Very, very angry. A call saying, "What if your daughter was raped? Would you have done that story?" And my response to that always was that, I'm very lucky. I'm very privilege that it's not my daughter. But just, but we need to tell certain stories. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've taken a real life perpetrator, fictionalized him, and tried to get into what made him the sort of the society that made him and gave him the kind of masculine, violent culture that made him, you know, carry out this gruesome crime. Or was it? I mean, what was it that you're trying to get into?
Yeah, Kunda, you know, I would not go that far. I am not doing a sociological. I am not saying that these are the factors. There are many young men or boys who live in utter poverty and destitution, and they do not rape. So I am not drawing a correlation. You know, so I'm not doing that. But my only thing in this story was the rapist sort of dehumanizes the survivor, the woman. Let's not do the same. There is a story that he has. Let's at least listen to it. It doesn't mean that we forgive him, we have compassion, or we do anything. But the fact is that he's got a story. Yeah.
And you've given him a name, December.
December, yeah.
And how much of December's story is borrowed from the actual real life protagonist here?
A lot. Yeah.
So besides the name, it would be, you
Yeah,
researched
yeah.
that. So it's
Yeah.
based on your journalistic
Police-
research.
Police records, court records, interrogation statements. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Uh,
And the mother, December's mother, is a copy editor. It
Yeah.
seems like almost like a newsroom anywhere in Delhi.
Yeah.
Why did you choose perhaps the mother to be a journalist? Was it because you're familiar with it, or was there a link between journalism and fiction again coming up?
That's a very interesting thing. When I think of it now, I don't. Yeah, I think it is a combination of all that. Also, it is a combination of she is a copy editor, which means that she puts several stories on the same page.
This is in the book, not in real life.
Yeah, in the book, so it's fictional, completely fictional. So she puts several stories on the same page, literally. And I thought, metaphorically as well, there is a certain poetry, a certain solidarity of suffering when all the stories are on the same page. That's why, in a way, the Syrian war, which, in fact,
Yeah.
that was the same week when the first refugees start to come. And for us, these individual stories of suffering are all a part of what we call the news, the white noise of news.
So while you're laying out the paper with all the wars, conflict, tragedies, human rights violations all across the world, you decided to take the format of fiction to almost bring them all together in what seems to be an afterlife,
Absolutely.
you know, with a dreamlike quality where they all meet. All these victims of Sandy Hook, you know, the girls who are gone missing in Delhi.
And they were the girls and the kids who went missing the same day.
Same day.
Yeah.
And those are, in the book, those are actual
The
people.
actual names from the police records. Yeah. The same day, the same night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's much more of an overlap between reality and fiction here than a reader would at first realize. And do you think that worked? I mean, obviously you think it worked, but did it work as well as you thought it would?
I think it, look, there is always a gap between what's in your head and what's on the page. You know, this is my fifth one, and the gap still remains. So yes, but at a certain level, it worked for me personally, because in a way, a certain story got told, which would never have got told.
You have, the book is called The City and the Sea, And the sea here seems to be a metaphor for the city.
Yeah, yeah, it's the
Yeah, and why this? I mean, why the sea? Why do you call the city the sea? I mean, there is the mother explaining that, but could you elaborate?
so so in the book, one of the things she always wants to do, it's been it's been on her mind, is to see the sea. She's never seen the sea in her life, and she wants to see the sea, and she has this globe in her room which she plays with, and she conjures up her life, a very simple ordinary life. In fact, a reader called me and said, why did you give her such a banal, such a commonplace aspiration of that I want to go on a vacation with my family, but that's her dream. And when she's lying, when she's in her last days, um, fiction gave me the tool to bring that dream to reality, to take her to the sea,
Yeah.
and to give her the family she will never have, and to then and also to underline that the power of forgiveness is only hers. No one in the world can forgive, uh, and that agency is only hers, and that is why the sea. Yeah, yeah.
You have almost, it seems deliberately, avoided using the word rape.
Yeah,
And probably because our newspapers are full of that word. And it's almost that us as readers, we've been desensitized to the crime because of the ubiquity of that word. Is that why you decided not to use it, or what was the reason?
No, one was that, obviously, it is something which I realized after the book was written.
Oh.
It did not strike me at all, and then when I thought about it, so one very obvious reason was I never felt the need to use the word rape. But I think the more important thing is, the word rape does come, but in different languages. There is a scene in the book where she's stepping out of the hotel for a walk in this lonely town, and the word, and it's told in several languages, the same word. But it was that, why should the story of a woman who doesn't get what is due to her should always be defined by rape? That rape is not the story. The story, that there's a lot more to life. So in a way, the book also then shows that it did not need to use that word to tell the story.
Yeah, and the use of Germany. You're obviously in Germany for a writer's work. Was it a writer's workshop?
Yeah, I was for a 1-year sabbatical. Yeah.
Yeah, you were one year away in Germany. You're sitting there. Was it because you were in Germany that the plot also alternates between the Baltic Sea and Delhi, or could it have been any other part of the world?
Yeah, it could. The one very straightforward thing was to give her the fulfillment of a hope of a vacation by the sea. That was number one. Number two was also at that time, because this became a global story, the Delhi rape.
Yeah.
I was sort of interviewed by German radio on this, and there's a lot of things happening. It was on page one of almost every international paper as well. At the same time, the other story of suffering was the refugees coming to
Syria.
Europe.
Yeah.
And Germany at that point had just started that debate of, should we let them in or not? And it was a very polarizing debate, very different in nature to sort of rape and women, but in a certain way similar, of pain and suffering and making things safer for people.
Yeah, you've written about an incident in the book that happened in 2012. It's now 8 years, and yet the epidemic of the crime has not abated. If anything, it seems to have grown. the horrificness of it all, and just the fact that in the last month there have been these, and this thing about burning the
Yeah.
victim afterwards, and this has been several copycat, almost seems to be
Yeah,
copycat
yeah,
crimes happening. It seems like whatever the media does, it's not really resolving the issue. That even a book that tries to go into the head of the perpetrator doesn't, I mean, obviously it's in English, so it's out of reach of most people, but if it was out in Hindi or in any of the local languages, or a film was made about it, what would be one way to use the media perhaps to at least reduce the risk of this escalation, it seems, of this crime?
Very tough to answer that quick question, Kundan.
I mean, fiction.
Yeah, I think, and once again, this sounds like stating the obvious, but I think there have been two good things that are happening. One is the silence is breaking.
Yeah.
I don't know how many of you here know that sort of a couple of years ago there was a very powerful Me Too moment in India. Very strong.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
Very, very different from the way Me Too played out in the US, obviously, but a very strong movement. So there are silences that are breaking a lot more now than they ever were. I think that's a positive thing. And it will happen as more and more women speak up. And they will. The inexorable logic of numbers in India, in South Asia, is such that more and more women are going to enter the public sphere. That force is completely irreversible. There is nothing anyone or 5 men intent on rape can stop it. So that's one very positive thing. The second thing is again the empathy. It was very disquieting. One can understand the anger, but the celebration in the media when the 4 or 5 accused were shot in the morning by the cops.
Yeah.
Very disquieting, this brutalization.
This is this time.
This
is
time.
last week.
And now, I can understand, I can intellectualize, I can sort of understand where that's coming from, but I think it needs a lot more, in our schools, the way we talk to our sons and daughters, how we teach in school. There is so much that needs to be done, but I think I am hopeful. I keep saying that I have a 13-year-old son. I want him to grow up, sort of safe. So I am hopeful that it will get better. It doesn't seem like it, but then that's also the logic of news. News, we tell you what is wrong. We never tell you what is working well. But you're right. It needs a lot more. It needs talking. It needs conversations that have never happened. We have to ban the usage of words like this boy is girly or this boy is effeminate. The whole idea of masculinity, what it should be, what it is, it's very, very complex. But
you've used fiction to get closer to the truth of this one incident.
Yes. Yeah.
But doesn't the problem go much deeper than that with fiction? And here I'm thinking of fictionalized film. So Bollywood, and the way women are portrayed in it,
Absolutely.
the way violent masculinity comes across as a very titillating thing, music videos, and the lewdness in it. It's almost like it's acceptable for men to behave
Absolutely.
like that.
Yeah.
So maybe at that cultural level, maybe there's a different area that we should be focusing on if we're going to address violent masculinity.
Absolutely. Why in 2019 do we need a woman in a short skirt still to sell a car? A picture. So there are certain things that will take a longer time to change. But I think one of the good things about social media, one of the good things about the internet has been uh, the proliferation of voices. So now you have some incredible work in Hindi films, for example, that that has the kind of conversations that we're talking about. Very strong women, very different kind of women, very different roles, uh, and you see that happening. Uh, so spaces are opening up. Uh, but you're right, the mass big Bollywood film is still
Yeah.
seems to be frozen in time. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think we can open the floor to questions in a while, but first I'd ask Rajkamaljha to maybe read a short section from one of his chapters where we see this interface between the newsroom where, obviously because as an editor, that's where he's familiar with, and the protagonist's mother, who works as a copy editor in a fictitious newspaper in, I think, Delhi, right?
Yeah.
So could I ask you to read this from As Was Her Routine? And maybe explain a little bit before you go into that.
So the book basically starts with a kid who's waiting for his mom to come home, and she hasn't. She works at a newspaper as an editor, and her shift she is on the morning shift. The morning shift in a newspaper is kind of a strange shift. You don't get to do much. You make a couple of foreign pages. So while he waits for her, he's thinking about the time. 15.
We have 15 minutes. Please.
So he says that it was her routine from Monday to Friday and one working Sunday a month, which was that day, December 16th. In fact, today is the anniversary. It was a Sunday that day. Ma should have been home latest by 4 p.m. Her shift ended at 3 p.m. from the newspaper where she worked on the copy desk, most of the time on the morning shift. She had to send out at least 2 or 3 inside pages to bed, ready before the night shift came in, and began work on the front page and the national pages. Then he says, if I sound as if I know quite a bit about Ma's work, is because Ma often talked to me about it. Once she took me to her office when there was no one there. She showed me how she made a page, how she drew text boxes into which she flowed the text, picture boxes into which she placed the pictures. She showed me how she typed in the headline, chose its size and font from the style sheet that popped up on the right-hand side when you hit F9 on the keyboard. Many of these stories and pictures that I work on are from the sea, she said. They are about people who live there, about things that happen to them. If we do not put these stories out, no one will get to know what is happening in the sea. Why is that important, I asked. Why do we need to know about the sea? What kind of a question is that, Ma said. If you want to live in the city, you can never run away from the sea. So why not get to know what's happening there? That way you will always be prepared. Prepared for what, I asked. When someone from the sea comes visiting, she said. I did not understand what she meant. Her shift was over. It was time to go home.
Thank you. I think very brilliant, and here you get this ominous sense of the sea being the city, and then of course the next chapter is a person in the Baltic looking at the ocean and the sea.
Yeah.
No, carry on. You were going to say
No,
something.
it's okay.
So anyone, questions, suggestions? No speeches, please. Yes. Let's go right here. Oh, the mic has its own mind. Okay.
Namaste. I'm Keshav Saran and I'm also a journalist. I still want to know how selfie journalism is undermining the democracy.
Okay, let's take one or two more questions.
Namaste. My name is Chandra Bhadra. I'm a professor, though retired, but I'm not tired yet. You know, on the issue of rape, you took refuge to writing a fiction rather than your, journalism, directly dealing with that menace of rape. What happened? Were you scared? Or because that you said that you didn't think that the term rape was to be pronounced in your, fiction. But I think, as a feminist activist, I'm an academic activist, I call myself, this menace of rape, that should be a day-to-day conversation, that balatkar as a term. We should bring it in our daily conversation at home, in schools, in where not. Okay? That's my feeling.
Thank you. Okay, let's take one more and then we'll go to the answers. Right here in front. A gentleman in the cap.
What do you think are the primary effects of citizen journalism on selfie journalism as you have defined it? And do you think broadcast journalism, would you say that broadcast journalism is more prone to selfie journalism than other forms of media?
Very, very interesting questions. So I'll take the first and the third because they're linked. I am not a fan of citizen journalism, just as I'm not a fan of citizen doctors and citizen lawyers and citizen whatever experts. I think good journalism needs an institutional support. It needs a newsroom. It needs good editors. It needs good reporters. It needs someone to stand by you when you do a story. It needs someone to stand by you when you make a mistake. Reporters do make a mistake. Editors do make a mistake. I am very lucky, as I said, to be in a newsroom where we have people to support us. Because it's the search for facts, it's a tough job to get to the facts of a story. Now, what selfie journalism, how selfie journalism sort of undermines that is because by keeping the focus on yourself, by making yourself the story every time, you forget the story that needs to be told. And I think that is our basic job. Readers pay for, not many of us want to pay for any content. Why should readers pay for something which is about yourself? So one, I think we need to seriously think about what is the kind of journalism we are doing, what's the kind of journalism we need to do. TV, yes, you are right, TV lends itself to this much more because the TV needs the picture. A TV is about faces. You may not have a story, but you can still spend half an hour in the studio. So you're very right. A TV lends itself to selfie journalism a lot more than good print journalism does. Now about the rape, I completely agree with you. The word has to be screamed out. The word has to be mentioned, talked about. It is the four-letter word that has to be told and has to be said. For this book, I did not have to do that because, as I said earlier, I work in a newsroom where there were several reporters and editors talking about the story. They were doing the story of the rape. In fact, they did more than 100 wonderful stories on it. So I was lucky to have that with me. So I did not feel the need to do that again as an editor.
Okay, one more question here. Anyone else? Right here in front. You had a question there? Okay. No, here.
Thanks. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things from, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things from the talk and what you just said now. I understand that you wrote this book from the point of view of, a poor young man who is as much a victim of patriarchy as anyone else. You also said at one point that the rape is not the important thing. And now you said you didn't feel the need to use the word rape because you'd done it in your newspaper work. On the last point, I think there's a confusion of categories, right? Like, as a reader, we're not having the same experience as you, so
Absolutely, yeah.
possibly we don't really, it might have helped. But on the first two things, like in the context of those two things you said, I wonder, what do you think there are any things to be careful about or wary about, or are there any ethical concerns about taking something that's happened to someone? And obviously the job of a fiction writer is to do whatever they want, but are there any ethical concerns about when a story feels like it isn't always being told, to use it to your own ends?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Yeah, you're very right. There are issues. Was writing the book tough? It was the most difficult. As I said, it's my 5th book. It was the most difficult for me to write, and these were the issues that I was playing with at the same time. Also, the fact that I am not that I'm a male. I am coming to this story from my lens, which is very restricted, very restrictive. But then the only thing that keeps you going is that you just want to be sincere and to be honest to what is going on inside your head and your heart. And you hope that you are, whether you are a success or not, I don't know. There are many things which I feel we could have done it differently. When I say that I did not feel the need for using the word rape in the book, I never meant that rape is not the important theme. In fact, the book is about the rape. Every page from the first page to the last page is about what happened the night of December 16th. But to me the challenge was, can I tell this story in a way where that incident itself, not that it is reduced in its significance, but can we look at other parts in the picture and get to know of a certain aspect of the story that has not been told.
Thank you. Any more? Yes, one last one here. I think we have time for one more.
My name is Manish Shah and I'm from Janakpur. So my question is, there is a book called Myth of Trauma by Susan Classy, and it says that the myth of trauma is it depends on how we explain things. The articulation is important than the incident. And the other thing is the way we are explaining and articulating things how it's related with trauma and rape and everything. And the other point is my question, when we have freedom of expression, then when it's become very accessible for us to express and freedom of expression, then it also stops us to think, or freedom to think. So these days when citizen journalism and selfie journalism is becoming accessible for everyone, and in our country it's more than to 60% who has access to the citizen journalism, it's also stopping responsibility to think through everything. So what do you think about this? Thank you.
I am not as pessimistic as you are. I think you're right. There are, each one of us has a phone. It is much easier to read a WhatsApp message than to read a thousand word article, if not a 500-page book. But I think there are more and more voices because of the freedom of speech that are being heard. Of course, there are some, there will be noise as well, but I think the benefits far outweigh whatever shortcomings or deficiencies there may be. Let more and more people speak, even if they do not think before they speak. That's fine. We can do the thinking later, but at least let us break the silence, and that is what has to be celebrated. Thought can come later. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Rajkamaljha, the audience, for being so attentive. If I may just summarize, I'd say that Mr. Jha is actually quite optimistic about social media, and maybe we're exaggerating a bit about the threat of fake news. But seeing what's happening around the region and around the world, where the crisis in media coincides with the crisis in democracy, and leading to the constriction of freedom of expression, I think we really have to be vigilant. And the second part of our talk, of course, dealt with this book, which as we were reminded today, it's exactly the same day, December 16, 2012, where the events described in this book, the real life events, have been fictionalized by the author. Thank you very much, Mr. Jha.